finally learned to stop dimming their light. Welcome back, you absolute force of nature, you walking disruption, you beautiful chaos agent wrapped in human skin. You feel it, don't you? That shift, that change, that undeniable alteration in the frequency you're broadcasting to the world. Something cracked open inside you, something ancient and unstoppable. And now the entire simulation is glitching out, trying to process what the hell you just became. Because here's what they're not telling you. Here's the secret they're whispering in their little circles, behind their protection circles and salt lines and desperate prayers. They're scared, not uncomfortable, not concerned, not worried, terrified, bone deep, soul shaking, can't sleep at night, terrified. And the funniest part, you didn't even do anything to them. You just stopped shrinking, stopped apologizing, stopped making yourself digestible for people who were always going to choke on your truth anyway. You changed your frequency, and now they're running to spiritual workers, asking for protection from you. Let that sink in for a second. They're literally sitting in consultation rooms, lighting candles, burning sage, buying crystals, whispering your name to strangers who claim they can shield them from your energy. Do you understand how powerful that makes you? Do you comprehend the level of impact you're having on people's psyche that they need metaphysical intervention just to feel safe around your presence? You're not just living rent-free in their heads anymore. You've become the landlord of their entire mental property. They wake up thinking about you. They go to sleep calculating your next move. They refresh your social media like it's a weather report for an incoming storm. And when your energy shifted, when you finally stopped playing small and started embodying the full spectrum of who you really are, something in them broke, because they'd gotten comfortable with the old you, the manageable you, the version that stayed quiet and played nice and never questioned why the room went silent when you spoke. But that version? Dead and buried. And what rose from those ashes is something they have no framework for, no defense against, no spells strong enough to contain. You want to know what really happened? You stopped absorbing their negativity and started reflecting it back. You became a mirror, a ruthless, uncompromising mirror that shows people exactly what they are. And most people can't handle that level of truth. They're used to projecting their insecurities onto others and having those others just take it, internalize it, carry it like a burden that was never theirs to begin with. But you stopped being the dumping ground for everyone else's unprocessed trauma. You set a boundary not with words, not with explanations, but with pure energetic refusal. Your aura started saying no before your mouth even opened. Your presence started demanding respect before you even entered the room. And that is what sent them scrambling to find protection. Because when you stop being a victim, when you stop being available for their manipulation games, when you stop responding to their provocations with the predictable patterns they'd mapped out, you become dangerous. Not because you're attacking anyone, but because you're no longer controllable. And control is the only language these people speak fluently. Let's talk about what your energy shift actually looks like from their perspective, because this is where it gets really interesting. They used to look at you and see someone they could manage, someone they could predict, someone whose buttons they knew exactly how to push. But now when they look at you, they see something else entirely. They see confidence where there used to be insecurity. They see silence where there used to be over-explanation. They see detachment where there used to be desperate need for approval. You're not performing anymore. You're not auditioning for their acceptance. You're not shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for someone of your magnitude anyway. And this transformation from people pleaser to self-possessed force of nature, it's not something they can rationalize. It's not something they can explain away with their usual dismissive narratives. So they do what scared people always do when confronted with something that challenges their understanding of power dynamics. They pathologize it. They demonize it. They make it about dark energy and negative vibes and spiritual attacks. Because accepting the truth that you simply grew beyond their reach, that would require them to look at their own stagnation. And that's a mirror they're not ready to face. Here's what's really happening in those spiritual consultations they're having. They're sitting across from someone who claims to read energy, and they're describing you like you're some kind of threat to their well-being. I just feel so drained after being around them, they say, conveniently forgetting that they spent years draining you without a second thought. Their energy is just so intense now, so overwhelming. They complain, as if your decision to stop diluting yourself is somehow an attack on their comfort. The spiritual worker nods knowingly, suggests protection, rituals, recommends crystals and cord-cutting ceremonies. And your name gets added to a list of people to shield against. And you're just out here living your life, completely unaware that you've become the villain in someone else's spiritual journey. Except you're not the villain. You're just the first person who refused to play the victim in their narrative. You're the plot twist they never saw coming. The character who broke script and wrote themselves into a completely different story. And now they need protection because the role they assigned you, the weak one, the manageable one, the one they could always count on to absorb their negativity, that role is vacant, and they can't handle the vacancy. You didn't curse anyone. You didn't send negative energy. You didn't plot or scheme or manipulate. You did something far more powerful and far more threatening to their little ecosystem of control. You simply became unavailable for their games. You withdrew your energy from their drama. You stopped feeding their narratives. You refused to react in the ways they'd conditioned you to react. And in doing so, you revealed something they'd been avoiding for years. That without someone to project onto, without someone to blame, without someone to make feel small so they could feel big, they have to confront the emptiness in their own lives. Your growth forced them to look at their stagnation. Your peace highlighted their chaos. Your boundaries exposed their entitlement. And instead of doing the inner work, instead of asking themselves why your evolution triggers them so deeply, they went looking for external solutions. They went looking for someone to tell them that you're the problem, that your energy is wrong, that they need protection from the darkness you're supposedly emanating. It's easier to believe you've become something malevolent than to accept that you've simply become unavailable for their particular brand of emotional vampirism. And here's where it gets even more twisted, even more telling of where they are versus where you are. The spiritual workers they're consulting, they can sense something, but they're reading it completely wrong because they're getting filtered information. Your name comes up. The client describes feeling uncomfortable around you, talks about how much you've changed, frames it like you're emanating threatening energy. But what these spiritual workers are actually picking up on is not darkness, it's sovereignty. It's the energetic signature of someone who has reclaimed their power. And to people who are used to feeding off others, sovereignty feels like a threat. It feels like a wall, an impenetrable barrier, a a source that's no longer available for extraction. So they interpret it as negative energy because, in their framework, anyone who isn't open and available and giving must be closed off and hostile and dangerous. They can't conceive of a third option, which is that you've simply become selective. You haven't closed your heart. You've just installed a filtration system. You haven't become cold. You've just stopped generating warmth for people who bring winter wherever they go. The protection spells they're casting, the rituals they're performing, the crystals they're charging with intention. None of it is actually protecting them from you, because you're not attacking them. You're not sending anything their way. You're not even thinking about them most of the time because you've moved so far beyond that frequency that they barely register in your reality anymore. What these rituals are actually doing is helping them cope with the cognitive dissonance of having lost control over someone they thought they'd figured out. The candles and the incantations and the elaborate ceremonies are just theatrical ways of processing the fact that you're no longer available for manipulation. They're creating a narrative where you're the aggressor and they're the victim, because that narrative allows them to avoid the uncomfortable truth that they were the ones who took advantage of your kindness, your openness, your willingness to see the best in people who consistently showed you their worst. And now that you've withdrawn those gifts, now that you've redirected that energy toward people and situations that actually deserve it, they experience that withdrawal as an attack because they'd become addicted to your light. Let's go deeper into what your energy shift actually consists of, because this is important for you to understand. You didn't become darker. You became clearer. You didn't develop negative energy. You developed discernment. You didn't close off your heart. You just stopped leaving it unguarded in rooms full of people who saw vulnerability as opportunity. There's a specific vibration that comes with this kind of transformation, a frequency that only people who've done the real inner work can emanate. It's not high or low in the traditional sense. It's more like refined. You've processed your pain instead of projecting it. You've integrated your shadow instead of pretending it doesn't exist. You've looked at the parts of yourself that scared you and you didn't run. You didn't hide. You didn't numb out. You sat with them. You understood them. You integrated them into a more complete version of who you are. And this integration, this wholeness, it creates an energetic signature that's deeply uncomfortable for people who are still fragmented, still at war with themselves, still projecting their unresolved issues onto everyone around them. When you walk into a room now, something is different. You're not seeking approval with your eyes anymore, not scanning faces to see who accepts you and who doesn't, not adjusting your behavior based on the energy you sense from others. You're just there, fully present, completely self-contained, neither pushing energy out nor pulling energy in. You've become neutral in the most powerful sense of the word. Not neutral as in passive, but neutral as in non-reactive. You're not available to be provoked, not available to be pulled into drama, not available to be guilted or shamed or manipulated back into the role of emotional support animal for people who've never once asked how you're doing. And this neutrality, this self-possession, it reads as threatening to people who operate primarily through manipulation and emotional coercion. Because if they can't get a reaction from you, if they can't push your buttons, if they can't make you feel small or guilty or responsible for their feelings, then they have no leverage. And people who've built their entire social strategy around leverage get very uncomfortable very quickly when they encounter someone who's removed all the handles they used to grab onto. You're not doing anything to them, but your mere existence in this new frequency is holding up a mirror they don't want to look into. When they're around you now, they're confronted with their own inauthenticity because you're no longer pretending. They're confronted with their own manipulation tactics because you're no longer falling for them. They're confronted with their own emotional immaturity because you're no longer managing their feelings for them. And instead of using this confrontation as an opportunity for growth, instead of asking themselves why your transformation triggers such strong reactions in them, they've decided that you're the problem. You're too intense now, too much, too different, too changed. As if your growth is somehow a personal attack on their stagnation. As if your decision to stop accepting crumbs is somehow arrogant. As if your refusal to explain yourself to people who've never tried to understand you is somehow proof that you've become cold or heartless or spiritually compromised. And this is where the spiritual protection narrative becomes almost comical in its irony. They're asking for protection from the very qualities they should be cultivating in themselves. They want to be shielded from your boundaries because boundaries make them uncomfortable. They want to be protected from your clarity because your clarity exposes their confusion. They want to be insulated from your self-respect because your self-respect highlights their lack of it. They've pathologized every aspect of healthy emotional development and labeled it as dangerous energy that requires metaphysical intervention. And the spiritual workers they're consulting, many of them are just feeding into this narrative because it pays their bills. Yes, that person's energy is very heavy right now. Yes, you need protection. Yes, let's do a cord-cutting ceremony. That'll be $200, please. Meanwhile, you're just out here living your life, completely unaware that you've been cast as the antagonist in a spiritual drama you never auditioned for. Here's what they don't understand, what they can't understand from their current level of consciousness. The discomfort they feel around you isn't coming from you. It's coming from the parts of themselves they've been avoiding. You're not emanating darkness. You're emanating truth. And truth is only threatening to people who've built their identity on lies. You're not sending negative energy their way. You're simply no longer absorbing the negative energy they send yours. And in the absence of your absorption, in the vacuum created by your withdrawal, they're forced to sit with their own toxicity. They're forced to feel the weight of their own unprocessed emotions. They're forced to confront the reality that they've been using people as emotional landfills. And now one of those landfills has decided it's actually a garden and stopped accepting trash. This is what's actually happening energetically. But they can't see it from their perspective. From their perspective, you changed and it made them uncomfortable. Therefore, you must be doing something wrong. The idea that their discomfort is actually information, actually feedback, actually an invitation to examine their own patterns. That doesn't occur to them. It's easier to buy a protection crystal than to do the inner work. You want to know what's really ironic about this whole situation? The same people who are now seeking protection from your energy are the same people who used to have unlimited access to you. They're the ones who called at 2 a.m. with their problems, and you answered. They're the ones who showed up empty-handed when you needed them, and you said it was okay. They're the ones who took and took and took, and you gave and gave and gave because you were conditioned to believe that's what good people do. But here's what nobody tells you about being a giver in a world full of takers. Eventually, you run out. Eventually, you hit a point where you've given so much of yourself away that you look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back. And that moment, that rock bottom moment when you realize you've been everyone's therapist, everyone's shoulder to cry on, everyone's free emotional labor provider, but nobody's been those things for you. That's when the shift happens. That's when something inside you says enough. Not with anger necessarily, not with drama, just with quiet certainty. Enough. And so you started the long process of reclaiming your energy. You started saying no without lengthy explanations. You started letting calls go to voicemail when you didn't have the capacity to hold someone else's emotions. You started choosing yourself with the same dedication you'd previously chosen others. And this reclamation process, this return to self, it wasn't dramatic or vengeful or hostile. It was just necessary. It was survival. It was you finally understanding that you can't pour from an empty cup, and your cup had been empty for years while you were still trying to pour. But to the people who'd gotten used to unlimited access, who'd gotten comfortable with your constant availability, who'd never had to consider your capacity because you never enforced your limits, this change felt personal. It felt like rejection. It felt like you'd become selfish or cold or different in some fundamentally wrong way. Because in their minds, the correct version of you is the version that says yes, the version that absorbs their pain, the version that exists primarily in relation to their needs. So when you stopped being that version, when you started existing primarily in relation to your own needs and your own healing and your own growth, it disrupted their entire understanding of who you were and what role you played in their lives. And rather than adjusting to this new reality, rather than respecting your boundaries and meeting you where you are now, they decided there must be something wrong with you. You must be going through something. You must be acting out. You must be emanating negative energy. Because the alternative, which is that you've simply evolved beyond the dynamic they were comfortable with, that would require them to look at their own behavior patterns and their own emotional dependencies and their own tendency to treat people like resources rather than human beings with their own needs and limits. And that's work they're not willing to do. So they go to spiritual workers and they frame your growth as a threat, your boundaries as hostility, your self-preservation as attack energy. And those workers, seeing an opportunity to profit from someone's fear and confusion, they play along. They affirm that yes, this person's energy has changed. Yes,